So as we approach COP26, the big oil companies, integrated oil companies, are facing a really big transition in their own strategies to try and fit in with the decarbonisation path that we want for the globe to 2030 and then beyond it to 2050. So there's some big threats to their existing businesses. I think everyone knows about internal combustion engines and how there is a lot of competition from electric cars. But beyond that, it goes to their gas as well, which is a divisive issue, frankly. We want to transition away from coal very quickly in the power gen mix, and gas feels like a very good temporary solution. But it also emits a lot of carbon when it's burnt. So there are two big products for oil and gas companies that we are calling into question. But COP26 may also highlight, along with all the threats to their businesses, some very large opportunities for oil and gas companies. So they have an awful lot of expertise, both engineering and scientific, as well as big balance sheets. And if we're going to solve the problems of the energy transition, we are going to need help from all quarters. So for the oil companies, I think there are some ways in which they can be part of the solution rather than just part of the problem. So as I think about what sort of opportunities they have ahead of them, renewables is the one that springs to mind. So the European integrated oil companies are going heavily into renewables. And just to give you an idea on the Total Capital Markets Day recently, they talked about us needing to triple the amount of renewables we have in operation by 2030. And of this, if you extrapolate Total's numbers and what they think they will do, the European oil majors could account for somewhere between 10 and 20% of the installation of renewables in the next decade. Beyond that, I think there are two technologies which will make a very big difference, and you look forward to what the IPCC sees the decarbonisation path being after 2030. These are the two that we've really got to get after. So I'm really thinking about hydrogen and carbon capture. And for the oil companies, this really is in their wheelhouse. Now, both these technologies are in their infancy at the moment, but they play very big roles in how we decarbonise the world according to the IPCC scenarios when we get past 2030 and especially when we get towards 2050. So if I look at both of them in isolation, hydrogen, one of the biggest uses of it is in the downstream oil and gas sector. That means that in most countries around the world, oil and gas companies are the #1 producers, handlers and users of hydrogen. So this will be very interesting expertise as we come to displace normal gas with hydrogen in the energy systems of the future. If I think about carbon capture, again, which is in its infancy, the oil and gas companies are some of the major players already. So for Equinor, for instance, has been storing carbon dioxide offshore Norway since the 1990s. It's also been storing it in Algeria and North Africa since the early 2000s. If you think about what you need for carbon capture, generally you need depleted oil and gas fields, usually gas fields, and it helps to have the infrastructure to pump the carbon dioxide out to those fields. So the way the oil and gas industry has worked, especially in somewhere like the North Sea, you have a lot of depleted oil and gas fields, and you have a lot of pipelines that can easily be reversible. So a lot of the European majors are looking hard at the North Sea and assets they thought were just decommissioning assets as potential carbon capture projects of the future. So there are big challenges for the oil and gas companies, but as I said earlier, if they can be seen as part of the solution, that may have interesting implications for the way we value them. And hydrogen and carbon capture are certainly areas where they have a competitive advantage over most other industries. What I will be looking for is concrete action. I think we all expect politicians to stand up and talk about how they are going to raise national targets for emissions reductions. But what is more interesting is what comes beneath that. What allows these projects to go ahead? So I would like to see politicians talking about how they're going to regulate and how they're going to price carbon capture and hydrogen so that the economics become attractive to the people who are going to put up the capital. It's a very complex world we're trying to solve for in 2050, and it's a very complex thing looking at the valuations of these companies. So the energy transition is going to be very complex, and what something like COP26 can do is start to help us fill in on the economics of how we're going to solve some of these problems. Because once we've got a better handle on what the economics and returns are going to be, then we can start to understand more about which companies are going to prosper and which ones are going to fall by the wayside over the coming decades.